Hi, my name is Alison and I'm the founder of HoneyBadgerRadio. In August of last year, when I received notice that Canadian Civil Court decided to deny my civil rights and contract law in order to uphold media-perpetuated discrimination against people who believe as I do, I said this: this ruling will assist any efforts of the authoritarian left or those sympathetic to remove dissenters' ability to participate fully in the financial system of the West. I've been warning about financial discrimination against, let's call them the queer-think people, for a while now, and now it's hit big time. In early December, Patreon decided to ban Sargon from its platform for insulting white nationalists by calling them, quote-unquote, white niggers. When the context of the phrase was explained to them, Patreon's trust and safety head, Jacqueline Hart, decided to cite a previous event in which Sargon and a number of other people who had criticized Anita Sarkeesian sat quietly in her panel at VidCon in the front rows of the audience. And when Anita noticed this, she started to hurl abuse and epithets and insults at Sargon from the podium. In response to this, Patreon essentially said Sargon did nothing wrong, which is exactly right. He did nothing wrong. But Jacqueline Hart decided to retroactively revoke Patreon's original judgment a year and a half ago and say that that was somehow a warning to Sargon, Sargon's first warning. So he gets kicked off somehow. I can't really follow this spaghetti of logic, but somehow him doing nothing at VidCon was a warning to him, and now he's kicked off without having done anything else. Space elves. All right. So, Sargon is kicked off. And in the process of explaining Sargon's ban, from what I've heard, Hart mentioned the real reason, which is reputational risk, or words to that effect. Now pay attention to that phrase because it crops up over and over again in this story. In fact, I've heard it myself when negotiating something with a vendor. They essentially said that Honey Badger Brigade was a reputational risk, and they dropped us as a potential client because of it. Now, the upshot of it all is Patreon has banned Sargon, and all hell broke loose. Many media producers ended up jumping ship to a smaller, centralized crowdfunding subscription service called Subscribestar. Then Subscribestar lost its access to PayPal and its credit card processor Stripe. Lovely little cascading thing going on here. So what are my plans in all of this? My initial response was to step back and wait and watch to see how the crisis unfolded. Because generally just watching will allow the real issues to emerge. And boy howdy did they emerge. So let's engage the situational awareness and survey the battlefield. This Vice article of August 2017 gives us a clue. It informs us all that, quote, there is no ruling that prevents a Canadian bank from doing business with white supremacist groups. Now, we all know a white supremacist is anyone who disagrees with the so-called Neopuritan tactics in fighting their boogeyman of choice, be it removing people's due process rights, freedom of speech, or their ability to feed and clothe themselves through access to the financial system. Again, no bad targets. No, sorry. Oh, wait. No bad tactics, only bad targets. And we know from history that when we practice discrimination against a group of people, we never realize retroactively, oh, that actually was a bad target. That never happens. Never. So they will be staying on the right side of history with this one. In Where Are the Nazis, CNN, I documented a violent mob of tens of thousands of Neopuritans converging on an Indian American senatorial candidate speaking out against GMOs, hippies from the Church of Weed, and a bunch of free speech peaceniks. You try to say that many P's in that close succession. And a bunch of free speech... This could be fun day. Fun. And a bunch of free speech peaceniks who had been labeled Nazis by CNN because white nationalists might lurk among them. Over the weekend, tens of thousands of Bostonians assembled to call these people,
"We are here for love, love, love,"
Nazis. Just the specter, because they didn't have all the controls in place to prevent the white nationalist from getting its slimy tentacles. As this example proves, Neopuritans, like that violent mob cited by CNN, are driven by disgust at the thought of any space that they don't have absolute control over. Because, some germs might get in. They're disgusted because that space is so open it might be infiltrated by the dreaded Nazi. And people don't even have to be racist to be a Nazi. They just have to prioritize freedom over thought purity. Because freedom could mean Nazi infiltration. And if you've got a free space, it might have Nazis in it. I mean, who knows? It's free, right? People are just moving in and out, freely associating with each other and talking to each other. That's a perfect breeding ground for germs. Hell, anybody who says we can fight racism and sexism and other isms without taking away people's rights, it is possible. It is possible to fight these social ills without taking away people's rights. That makes me a Nazi for saying that. People who don't think as we do are the problem. Put those queer folk, those queer think people, put them up against the wall. Let's persecute them. Once again, that has never been proven by history. History has never looked back at the persecution of a group of people and said, hey, actually we were wrong to do that. That was stupid. Why did we ever think that was right? That just never happens in history, does it? Anyway, I digress. There is something revealed in that Vice headline that many Americans may not know about. Let's read it again. Quote, "There is no rule in Canada that prevents a Canadian bank from doing business with white supremacist groups. There is such a rule in the U.S., a secret guideline, if you will. It's called Project Chokepoint. Project Chokepoint, sort of like the Dear Colleague letter, was a set of informal policies created by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, responsible for insuring banks in America. The FDIC targeted banks providing financial services to home-based charities, fireworks and firearm retailers, payday loans, dating and escort services, and other types of shady businesses. And purveyors, and here's the one that's really, purveyors of racist materials. So there's a huge market for that. Of course, when you hear the word racist, you need to realize it's the Neopuritan definition of racist, which apparently includes defending due process, free speech, and financial rights of alleged racists. I almost said rapists there, but actually, probably they're pretty much interchangeable at this point. And any criticism of the way Neo-Puritans deal with racism, including their occult segregationist policies, their targeting of minority men for removal from their families and communities, and their treatment of minority women as political tokens and reproductive commodities. You can't criticize any of that because that makes you a racist. All of the companies targeted by the FDIC's campaign were all business types except for that pesky and wide-reaching racist materials classification. It's an enormous market for racist materials. Enormous. People are making their fortunes off of it. I'm going to read from the Community Financial Services of America. They sued federal regulators after their business sector was targeted. In this case, it's payday loans. This information is from a statement of undisputed material fact submitted to the court in that case. There's the link in the low bar. Newly unsealed court documents released today show evidence of the federal government's illegal Operation Chokepoint program, in which top government officials and federal agencies pressured banks to cut all ties with lawful businesses. This illegal campaign included threats from senior government officials that agency staff would be fired and bank officials could be subject to criminal prosecution. The key findings disclosed in this filing indicate that this campaign was instituted at the very highest levels of the FDIC and has ruthlessly and enthusiastically been implemented in the field. Ruthlessly and enthusiastically implemented in the field. What that means is that the bankers took this ball and ran with it. And it totally changed the banking culture. What a surprise. These documents reveal a shocking abuse of power and conspiracy to single out an industry and bring it to its knees, something far and away from a regulatory agency's requirement to proceed according to the rule of law and due process, said Dennis Schall, CEO of the Community Financial Services Association of America. Despite hearing statements to the contrary from government officials for years, these records prove that there was an intentional and targeted campaign to carry out an illegal policy. If personal preference and subjectivity is the guide for regulation, an awful precedent is set, and there is no end to the interests that can be targeted: pro-choice groups, environmental causes, religious groups, and many more. And I am not a stranger to personal preference and subjectivity. Oh, and again, those type of businesses aren't the only targets. Elegy Records, a company that sells metal music, was dropped by PayPal and its credit card processors, and then its bank, citing a reputational risk. According to Robert DeSanford, owner of Elegy Records, when the processors would run a check on me and my business, it comes back as high risk and reputational risk. Some of the red flags come back as promoting hate speech, promoting rape, promoting violence, and promoting hatred. If Rob is accurate in what he's reporting, that means racist materials has crept in scope. And in fact, the banks, depository institutions, the credit card companies, the credit card processors are all interpreting reputational risk and racist materials in the broadest way possible, which is typical, because business will interpret law or policy from the government in the broadest way possible in order to avoid running afoul of it in the future. That is the true horror of this kind of thing, of this kind of intervention. So what we're dealing with isn't banks and credit cards and credit card processors acting independently. They are acting in concert with at least one government department, the FDIC. In fact, the so-called activist side of all this, for example, the color of change or change the terms, may be yet another astroturfing campaign by this coalition of authoritarian government departments and corporations. The problem goes deeper and higher than anyone suspected, and it gets worse. There's a bill, H.R. 2706, Financial Institution Consumer Protection Act of 2017. Introduced by the U.S. Representative Lutkemeyer, this bill would directly combat the FDIC initiative to pressure banks to remove customers who represent reputational risk. There are two problems here. One, the bill passed the House, but is now dead. The Congress, under which it existed, is now dissolved, so it would have to be reintroduced, and I haven't heard any word about it being reintroduced. The other problem is even deeper than a dead bill, if you can believe it. The text of the bill would have stopped federal regulatory agencies from discriminating against banks doing business with customers deemed a reputational risk. But it does nothing to protect those customers from banks practicing that discrimination themselves. At least not when you read the text of the actual bill. So here's the sequence of events, eerily similar to what happened to Obama's Dear Colleague letter. The FDIC threatened banks to stop doing business with customers who they deemed a reputational risk, interpreted very broadly. The banks complied. Then people said, hold up. A bill was introduced to stop federal banking agencies from pressuring banks about customers who are deemed a reputational risk by the government. The bill passed the House and then ended up in bureaucratic limbo and now is dead. Meanwhile, those financial institutions continue to perpetuate the discrimination against customers with reputational risk, interpreted broadly, in part because the federal regulatory intervention has changed the banking culture. Even the now dead bill wouldn't have done a thing to combat this cultural shift. And the Neopuritans in the previous government and in this government have successfully started an uncontrollable trash fire in the financial system. You know that thing we need for all of us to stay alive, and we also need it to be neutral for everybody to invest their trust in? Yeah, a trash fire in that. And it's like, when you have watched this for as long as I have, you see this insanity infect academia, media, government, games, romance novels, the comics industry, the animation industry. And then finally, you're just watching it infect every organization, every government organ, every subculture, and you just watch it and you're like, that's going to hit something mission critical eventually, and boom, it does. I would say I told you so, but what's the point at this point? Now we're dealing with Neopuritans having the power to deny people financial services if they disagree with the Neopuritan program of removing people's civil rights to fight Nazis. Tens of thousands of Bostonians assembled to call these people
We are here for love.
Nazis. I'm somewhat heartened that, according to Vice, that no Canadian financial institution actually responded to Vice's accusation that they don't discriminate against the queerthink people, except one, and that one just said no comment, which is PR speak for fuck you. Of course, the precedent set when the judge ruled against me in my lawsuit is that any corporation doesn't have to uphold a contract with someone they don't like the queer thought of that person, or the thing, the conscience, the beliefs that person has. Therefore, Canadian financial institutions may not even need a government directive or rule or law to prevent people from having any means to make a living, because every bank in Canada can just break their contract with their customers at will now. Perhaps. The Vice article also goes on to mention that there's nothing preventing people pressuring Canadian banks to discriminate against people like us, like me, financially. So, like the EU considers a bank account to be a human right, but that's not the case in Canada. So they can get in there and they can start building up their astroturfing campaigns to start determining who gets access to a bank account. Lovely people, huh? And again, history never wakes up and says, you know what? You said that was a good target. You said that wasn't a bad target. And you said no bad tactics, only bad targets. But I think that persecuting that group of people was actually not a good idea. History never does that. So hopefully what happened to me will get overturned on appeal. But stay tuned. Stay tuned to that. By the way, the defendant's shenanigans haven't stopped. Now they're playing silly buggers with their addresses and refusing to be served. So they're not even updating the court with their proper legal address, which they can't actually do that. But be that as it may, they are doing it. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. So what do?
I mean, it might be possible that the Patreon method is not what's needed exactly for the future of the internet. I mean, this is what we're trying to figure out right now, which is why we've got every engineer, people from Google and Facebook and Yahoo and everybody reaching out to us, because it's like everyone's trying to solve this problem.
I've known since before the judgment that there's something deeper and more sinister at foot. That the ultimate aim of the people who want to shut us up was to take away our ability to do business and make a living. Hell, there's probably a final solution in the works for us antisocial, undesirable queerthink people. Although maybe just letting us freeze and starve and rot will satisfy them. When everyone was heralding Subscribestar as a solution, I announced to my patrons that I won't be going on the platform. I had concerns about its stability in the context of the climate we're facing. Don't get me wrong, I think the team behind Subscribestar is earnest, and their politics seem to align more with the independent media being kicked off of Patreon than anything else, but my concerns were, at the time, that they weren't ready to scale, and a small raft can be easily sunk just by having everyone jump on at once. My other concern was that the same shadowy forces influencing Patreon would go after them. And that's exactly what happened. And just to recap, I wasn't in the middle of moving to Subscribestar. I was actively arguing against it. The people who suggested it to me, and with other creators. I won't actually be leaving Patreon. There's 2 reasons for this. First of all, I'm not doing their dirty work for them. I actually think they don't care about the money. Their new financiers are probably only too happy to turn Patreon to yet another astroturfing welfare campaign. for people who think in lockstep with them. So they're just going to promote people who agree with their politics. In other words, they'll pay money to get rid of us queer think people. And I think this is the outcome that they want, for us to choose to leave. So we have no recourse against their decision, because it's technically our decision. If they want to get rid of me, they're going to have to get blood on their hands. I'm going to force them to make the first move. As King Pyrrhus said, if we are victorious in one more battle with the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined. I'm not stoked about my odds in fighting back against Patreon, but I promise I will make it the most painful fight that I can. Sometimes the point isn't to win, it's to make the fight so brutal the other side never wants to fight again. And that is the fight I will bring. The other reason I'm not going to leave Patreon is that the Neopuritans will most likely go after me on Patreon first, giving me some advance warning before they go after my ability to use credit card processors or a bank account directly, and also slowing them down, presumably. However, I recognize many of you can't stomach the idea of giving these individuals of a certain merit any money, so that brings me to the next thing that I'm going to do. In early 2017, I started work on a prototype storefront for online content creators based on WordPress. There are storefronts for orthodontists, dog groomers, toy makers, but so far I have never seen a storefront geared towards online media creators that they set up themselves on their own branded site. So I set about creating what I wanted to see. I have a functional prototype that has been up since mid-2017 at www.feedthebadger.com. What you see here is a completely original creation created by HoneyBadgerRadio. And this prototype online content creator storefront does work already. It just doesn't have every single feature it needs to have yet. The difference between what I'm working on and, say, a Subscribestar is that it's decentralized. Each creator would set up their own branded website using WordPress and their own financial backbone using a WordPress finance plugin. What Feed the Badger does is bring together most of the ways that you can pay Honey Badger Radio: subscriptions, project fundraisers, direct donations through PayPal, cryptocurrency wallet, and I want to expand that to include products like mugs and t-shirts, as well as a more intuitive subscription interface like Patreons. The Feed the Badger prototype was halted because the programmer I was working with at the time was a student and couldn't continue to work on it with his current class load. But now I have a new programmer interested in this project and eager to help finish this prototype. I don't have a lot of engineers and programmers just throwing themselves at me, but despite that, I do have a working prototype that you can go and look at and nose around and test out. So go to feedthebadger.com and take a look. When we complete the fully functional prototype, and if creators express a desire to be able to set up their own similar independent platform like it, I'll see if I can fund porting it into a plugin and theme that other creators can download and install at their own site. Each creator will have to set up their own financial backbone, so they'll have to put some elbow grease into it on the site's back end. This is not the easiest solution. It's something that will take work, but it will give you some financial independence. I want to replicate the one thing that makes Patreon worth a damn, in my mind. It's not the fact that we're all squatting on the same centralized service. It's the ease and simplicity of its subscription service and content delivery, and the way that it just shows. You can see the number of patrons, you can see the monthly income. I like the way it shows everything. So that's what's really good about it for me. And I want to make that available to everyone at a reasonable cost and sans any political strings. I mean, this is something that if it works, it could actually be a significant competitor to Patreon, and one that would be far more difficult to destroy than Subscribestar. Now, and ultimately, the end of the final bottom line is I don't care who uses it, and it's not my call. And because it's a downloadable plugin plus theme, it really can't be my call, which is just the way I like it. So to recap, I'm proposing 2 stages. 1, get my prototype up at Feed the Badger, completed. And 2, if there's interest, porting that prototype into a downloadable plugin and theme for WordPress commerce sites, for independent WordPress commerce sites that creators control completely on their own. It won't be an out-of-the-box solution by any means. You won't be able to sign up on a centralized site and just put your shingle out there and expect the gunslingers to respect your property. It will take time and effort to harden your financial backbone, and you will have to take those steps as an individual. This independent distributed storefront for creators will give online creators some space to breathe, because part of the problem now is grouping up, getting everybody going onto one centralized crowdfunding subscription service, so it's easy to take everyone down at once by yanking that company's credit card processors. So if you want to help get this prototype finished and also help Honey Badger Radio through this current difficulty, please go to... This is the fun part. I gotta... That's not right. This is right. Okay, go here, www.feedthebadger.com, and consider supporting us making the finished prototype a reality. The first rule in asymmetrical warfare: disperse and harden your positions. Winning may be just a matter of survival. So here are the things we need to do, in my estimation, after having surveyed the terrain of battle. 1, fight on Patreon. Slow them down there as much as possible. Right now, it's more difficult for the shady interests behind all of this to root us out of Patreon's own service, because they can't axe Patreon's credit card processor or PayPal. They can't go after Patreon's supply lines. So just sit there and force them to go after you one by one. So that's going to slow them down. And each one of us that they kill, each one of us that they go after, we need to raise hell about it and fight back with everything we've got. Everything. Every conceivable thing. So in the interests of not doing their job for them, I'm staying on Patreon. If and when they are forced to oust me, I will fight tooth and nail. Them making the first move will leave all of my potential options open for fighting back. All of them open. And I'd advise everyone else to do the same. Make every livelihood they squash, every person they kick, make every inch they advance cost them dearly. Number 2, develop individual storefronts that you put the bulk of your support through. So while we're fighting on Patreon, we need to all have our supply lines somewhere else. Centralized crowd-funded subscription services are the perfect set-piece battles for the banking system. There are a whole bunch of high-value targets, all reliant on the same supply line, which is easy to cut off. Keep creating them for sure, but their main use is probably just to divert attention from your actual supply lines. Drive people to your independently branded financial backbone. One of the things that most disgusts me about the Patreon debacle is that I wasted 4 years of promotion on them that I will not get back. Don't make that mistake going forward. Push people to your own site. And if shit gets even more real than real, put up a page saying, send checks here. You gotta do what you gotta do to survive. Number 3. Harden the fuck out of your financial backbone. Make yourself bomb resistant. There is no such thing as bomb proof. Take it from someone who learned how to tape windows so that they would break instead of shatter, and use a gas mask by the time I was 10. Their safety is an illusion. All safety is an illusion. The best you can do is make yourself less unsafe. There is no silver bullet here. Just making yourself hard to kill. Now, this is a midterm solution at best. As for a long-term solution, first we need to define what the problem is.
And it's still, I mean, one of the things we've been talking about now for the last, well, it's really for the last year, but intensely in the last month, is what actually is the problem itself?
The answer to what the problem is fairly simple. This is society. This is the narrative that society harms women. A narrative now shouted from the pulpits of government, media, and academia. These two things are on a collision course. Actually, they've already collided, and now our society is exploding and imploding at the same time because of it. And the simple reason why is this. Society is built by capturing men's instinct to provide and protect for women. What happens when you tell men society harms women? The thing that they created to provide for and protect women harms women. What do you think's going to happen? What happens is that either men shut down completely or men start dismantling society to find those gosh darn women haters. The answer to what the problem is straightforward. To be quite honest, the real question is why? Why have we done something so profoundly and obviously stupid as this? I mean, it goes beyond being offensive. It's just, it's like watching society in a field of rakes, and it keeps stepping on the rakes and hitting itself in the face, and you're like watching this. It's like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing something so stupid? And that, why are you doing it, is the $1 million question. And I'll be throwing my own answer into the ring in a future video, so stay tuned. That one's going to be really cool. I hope you guys like it, but not a lot of people see this stuff. This whole situation has had a pretty negative effect on Honey Badger Radio. We've lost over $3,000 and over 200 patrons. Ouch. A supporter, Rob, sent me a letter in response to my video from last September called Go Home Comic Girl, #Comicsgate, in which I describe the fallout of the court judgment. This is Rob. The recent video of Go Home Comic Girl had Alison expressing being tired of asking for money. The implication is that it is greedy and selfish and should be embarrassing. This is bafflingly far from how I see it. You are my champion fighting for my son's future. There are a lot of little boys quickly growing into a world more vicious than the one I grew up in. Their fathers need champions too. Collectively, we will give you the arms and armor to fight this fight. The tools you need to fight with include a full belly and the resources to push petty concerns aside. You are failing us if you don't ask for what you need. If you need more, ask for it. I'll be honest, it's not specifically because it's embarrassing that I don't ask. Although that is part of it. It is somewhat embarrassing, and it doesn't, some commentary doesn't really help with that. It's because I'm afraid. The funny thing is that I am not afraid of Patreon. I am not afraid of the Calgary Expo or the Mary Sue or the provincial court system or even the Court of Queen's Bench. But I am afraid of asking and nobody responding. That is my biggest fear. Go figure, right? Anyway, this isn't a solo gig. Honey Badger Radio supports 3 households and contributes significantly to the income of a 4th. Between us all, that's 6 adults, 1 kid, 6 cats, and 2 dogs. 6 cats. Sometimes that seems accurate. And 2 dogs. Keks. 6 keks and 2 dogs. All right, I'm going to stop that. All right, 3 women, 3 men, including a Mexican and a Puerto Rican. So, not diverse at all. All of us value being able to do this work a great deal. It matters to us to fight for men and boys, and for their right to live in a world that doesn't chain them to a narrative of blame and guilt, so, shall we say. Not to mention, as this Patreon disaster hit, I had just signed a contract that represents a significant step forward and legitimacy for the men's rights movement, but also represents a significant outlay of money. Money I don't know if I'll have. It fucking broke my heart to have to tell Brian and Ed that I don't know what the future holds for Honey Badger Radio. And, we'll see. I'm sure knowing that quote-unquote reputationally risky companies like ours might go under as an extra special late Christmas gift for Jack Conte, Jacqueline Hart. Hart, how ironic she's called Hart, hey? And all those other Neopuritans who want to nuke the world to kill racists, and define racists as all the people who don't want to nuke the world to kill racists. Because that's sure to put them on the right side of history. Anyway, I'm asking you to please consider helping us now. This is when you decide whether or not Honey Badger Radio lives to fight another day. So go to Feed the Badger, and if you've dropped your Patreon pledge, then please pre-pledge there. And if you're thinking of supporting us, now would be an excellent time to support us. I've put up 2 options. You can support us one time to get us through this madness and help me build the prototype. This is awfully lewd, isn't it? It's putting my finger in this crack over here. Or support us monthly here. It's the same place each time. Just don't let our fight end here. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who supported us so far. I never want to disappoint you guys. Thank you. And subscribe Star lost its access to PayPal and its credit card processor Stripe. Oh my, how the hell did you open that? This is the culprit.